The cabin was old. I could tell the moment I stepped onto the creaky floorboards. They groaned beneath my boots, echoing in the otherwise silent house. I knew the cabin had been here for years, probably longer than I could even guess, but I didn't mind. I had spent countless nights in cabins like this one, looking for peace away from the noise of the world. Something about the quiet of the woods always made me feel grounded, like everything slowed down, giving me a chance to catch my breath. As I explored the living room, I took note of the decor, or what little there was of it. The furniture was mismatched, the kind of secondhand stuff you'd expect to find in a cabin like this. The walls were bare, the windows covered with thick curtains that blocked out any chance of moonlight. The floor had an old rug that looked like it had seen better days, its colors faded and threadbare in places. Everything felt stuck in time, as though no one had bothered to update or fix it in years. I walked across the living room, my boots causing the floorboards to creak beneath me. Then, near the far corner, I saw it. A loose plank in the floor. It wasn't anything alarming, just a slight gap where the wood had shifted over the years. The corner of the plank had lifted a bit, enough for me to see the space beneath it. I bent down to look, but quickly saw there was nothing to worry about. It wasn't big enough to hide anything, just a little space where dust and dirt had gathered. I straightened up and shrugged it off. There was nothing odd about it. It was just an old cabin, after all. I decided to spend the rest of the evening getting the place settled, making it comfortable for the night. I started a fire in the small wood stove in the corner, which gave the cabin a warm, orange glow. As the flames crackled and the scent of burning wood filled the room, I unpacked my things and settled in for the night. The first few hours were peaceful, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional gust of wind outside. I stretched out on the couch, reading a book I'd brought with me, occasionally glancing at the loose plank in the corner of the room. It seemed so insignificant, just a small detail in a house full of age. But the more I looked at it, the more my mind began to wander. There was something about it that felt off, like a nagging thought at the back of my mind. Eventually, I decided to go to bed. The fire had died down, leaving only the embers glowing in the stove, casting faint shadows on the walls. I closed the curtains, undressed, and crawled into the bed that was tucked in a small room just off the living area. The bed itself wasn't anything special. Old wooden frame, lumpy mattress, but it was comfortable enough for a night's rest. I turned off the light and pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to push away the strange feeling I had about the cabin. It didn't take long for me to drift off, lulled by the stillness of the night. But then, in the dead of night, I woke to a sound. At first, it was subtle, just a faint scratching, like something small scurrying beneath the floor. I told myself it was probably a rodent, maybe a mouse or a squirrel trapped in the walls. The cabin was old, after all, and pests were bound to find their way in. But then, as the sound continued, it became clearer, more deliberate. It was scraping, shifting, moving like something or someone was trying to break free from below. I lay still, frozen under the covers, listening to the sound. The scratching grew louder, followed by a slow, labored breathing. It wasn't animal-like anymore, not the way a mouse or rat might sound. It was different. It was human. The breath was shallow but heavy, like it was coming from a chest that was struggling to fill with air. And it was close, so close, I could feel the vibration of it under my bed, like the floorboards were trembling beneath me. My heart began to race. My eyes darted around the dark room, but I couldn't see anything. The only light came from the faint glow of the embers in the stove, casting long shadows that danced against the walls. The air was thick with tension, and my mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I told myself again that it was just an animal. There was nothing to be afraid of. It was just a raccoon or something, a stupid raccoon. But then, I glanced at the floor. The loose plank, the one I had noticed earlier, was gone. It wasn't in the corner anymore. The space beneath it was wide open, the edges of the wood now jagged and uneven. I could see something moving beneath the floor, its shape shifting in the dim light. The scraping had stopped, replaced by the sound of something heavy and deliberate being dragged across the floor, like fingers crawling on wood. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. And then, as if to confirm my worst fear, I saw it. Eyes, two small, glowing points of light reflecting from beneath the floor. They were bright, too bright, piercing through the darkness like twin flames. The eyes weren't like the dull, glossy sheen of animal eyes in the dark. These were sharper, more focused, and, if it was even possible, more aware of me. They stared right at me, unmoving, and then it smiled. The smile was slow, wide, unnatural. It stretched across the dark space beneath the floorboards, a grotesque, unsettling grin that made my blood run cold. The teeth were jagged, yellowed, and too many for it to be human. But somehow I knew with a sick certainty that it was watching me, like it had been waiting for me all along. I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to jump out of bed and run, but my body wouldn't respond. My limbs were frozen, locked in place by the terror that gripped me. And then, as if mocking my fear, it shifted. The thing beneath the floor moved closer, its eyes never leaving mine, and the sound of its breathing grew louder, more ragged, like it was coming up through the floor to where I lay. I had to get out. I had to leave. With every ounce of willpower I could muster, I finally broke free of my paralysis. I leaped out of bed and rushed for the door, not even bothering to put on shoes. My feet slammed against the wooden floor, and I didn't care. I didn't stop. The thing behind me, whatever it was still there, still watching. I could feel its presence, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I ran out of the cabin, into the freezing night air, and didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, parked a good distance away. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys, but I didn't care. I didn't need to think. I just needed to get away. The engine roared to life as I sped down the gravel road, not once glancing in the rearview mirror. Couldn't. I knew something was still out there, something that had been waiting for me, but I didn't need to know what. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, far enough away that the fear in my chest began to settle. I spent the night in a motel, trying to convince myself it was just a bad dream, that I had imagined the whole thing. But even now, as I sit here, the memory lingers. The eyes, the smile, the breathing, and the absolute certainty that it wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something far worse, and I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next person to step into that cabin. But that person will never be me. The storm hit hard that night. The wind howled like a wild animal, its shrieks clawing through the trees outside. I could hear the heavy branches creaking, bending, and groaning as they were pulled and twisted by the gusts. The rain lashed at the windows, each droplet hitting with such force that it sounded like the world was being pummeled from all sides. I had been prepared for the storm, knowing it was coming, but I didn't realize just how ferocious it would be. I had rented the cabin for a few days, hoping for a quiet retreat, far from the distractions of daily life. It was a small, old place nestled deep in the woods, with no other homes for miles. The kind of place you go to escape the noise of the world. A place that could either bring peace or feel unsettling if you weren't used to the isolation. I was used to solitude, so the thought of being alone in this old cabin didn't faze me. It had creaky floors and the smell of damp wood, but that was part of its charm. A place that felt old, but sturdy. As I settled into bed that evening, the storm intensified. I tried to distract myself from the storm's rage by reading, but the wind outside kept pulling my attention back to the windows. The dark shadows of trees moved like slow giants, their limbs swaying and rattling against each other. The windows groaned, the frame flexing in the gusts. I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was trying to force its way inside, as if nature itself was trying to break into the cabin. Eventually, I gave up on the book, put it down, and lay back, listening to the storm's fury. The rhythmic sound of rain was somewhat calming at first, but then something else pierced the cacophony, something that didn't belong. It was faint, but unmistakable. A voice. It was low and muffled, coming from somewhere within the walls. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe some trick of the storm, but it was too deliberate, too distinct. The voice sounded like it was coming from just beyond the drywall, a whisper carried on the gusts of wind. It was soft, just a faint murmur, but enough to catch my attention. I lay still, straining to hear it more clearly, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The storm outside was deafening, but the voice still came through. It was a woman's voice, whispering something so faint I could barely catch it. "Help me," she whispered, the words broken, like someone calling out in their sleep. My heart rate quickened. I sat up in bed, now fully alert, listening for any sign that I had imagined it. I waited for a few moments, but there was nothing, just the storm and the occasional creak of the house settling. Maybe I was just hearing things. After all, the wind had been known to make strange sounds in the old cabin. But then it came again, this time clearer. "Help me." My skin prickled. That wasn't the wind. That was real, and it was coming from inside the cabin. The voice was muffled, yes, but it wasn't as if it was from outside. It was almost like it was coming from the very structure of the cabin itself. I got out of bed and walked over to the wall where the sound seemed to be coming from. The wooden slats creaked under my feet as I moved, the old boards groaning as if they too were protesting against the storm. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening. The whispering continued, but now it was louder, clearer, almost like it was inside my head, filling my ears with a desperate plea. "Help me." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was chilling, unsettling. I knocked lightly on the wall, hoping to hear something solid in return, to convince myself this was just some odd sound caused by the storm. The house was old, after all, but the wall felt solid, unyielding. There was no hidden room, no gap or space. It was just the wall. I knocked again, this time harder, but the voice kept coming, each repetition louder, closer, as if it were drawing nearer with each passing moment. "Help me." I stepped back, trying to process what was happening. The voice was no longer just coming from the wall. It was closer, like it was right behind me. My eyes darted around the room, scanning for any sign that something had changed, that there was something, someone, with me. But the room was empty, save for the flickering light from the single lamp on the table. The wind howled outside, the rain tapping against the windows like tiny fists. The whispering grew more frantic, the voice breaking as if it were struggling to say something more, to explain what it wanted. But it was no longer just a whisper. It was a scream, muffled and distorted by the walls of the cabin. The sound was deafening now, filling the space with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. "Help me! Help me!" The voice screamed, as if it were coming from deep within the cabin, twisting through the beams and beneath the floorboards. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, screaming out in pain. I backed up, my breath shallow, my mind racing. What the hell was happening? This couldn't be real. It was just the storm, playing tricks on me. I was just hearing things, right? But no, this was something different. The voice wasn't fading. It was getting closer, clearer, like it was moving towards me. Felt like it was in my head now, right in the back of my skull, pounding against my thoughts. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen, rooted to the spot, my feet unable to move. The voice continued to cry out, louder now, desperate. I could feel it in my chest, reverberating through my ribcage, like a deep, hollow thrum. My heart pounded in my ears, and I thought I might pass out. The last thing I remember was the scream. A woman's scream came from right behind me, right in my ear, so close that I could feel the breath, cold and ragged, on my skin. I spun around, but there was nothing, just the dark, empty room, just the storm outside. I don't remember when the scream ended, or if it did. Everything went silent after that, the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. The storm had stopped, the winds died down, the rain ceased. It was as if everything had been suddenly erased, leaving only the stillness. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring into the room, my mind scrambling for answers that didn't exist. But eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted out the door, into the night, into the darkness. The air was still cold, but the pressure had lifted. The walls no longer whispered. I didn't stop running until I found my car, parked several hundred yards from the cabin. I drove away without looking back, without knowing what had happened. The road ahead was clear, the storm gone, but her voice, still echoed in my head. I never went back to that cabin. No one ever will again. Years later, I found out the truth. The cabin had been abandoned for decades, but before that, a woman had lived there alone. They said she was a recluse, someone who kept to herself, but no one ever really knew much about her. Her name was Maggie. She had disappeared one night, just vanished. The police never found any trace of her. No one knew what happened, but I know, and I never told anyone about what I heard that night. We had been looking forward to this weekend for months. The plan was simple. Get away from everything, leave behind the constant noise of work and life, and spend a few days out in the woods. We rented an old cabin, not too far from the nearest town, but far enough to feel isolated. Just the five of us, me, Jason, Rachel, Leah, and Ben. No cell service, no distractions, just nature and good company. The first day was peaceful. We unloaded our gear, set up the place, and made ourselves at home. The cabin was old, but sturdy. Wooden floors creaked beneath our feet, and the smell of pine filled the air. It had a rustic charm, like it was untouched by time. We spent the evening by the fire, laughing, playing cards, and just enjoying each other's company. Everything felt perfect. We were all in high spirits, joking around about how we should make this a yearly tradition. That night, after a few beers and stories around the fire, we all went to bed. The sounds of the woods were familiar. Distant hoots of owls, the rustle of branches in the wind, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot from some unknown animal. I was tired, the kind of tired that makes you fall asleep the moment your head hits the pillow. But something was off, not in a big way, just a subtle feeling that settled over me as I drifted off. A slight unease, like I was being watched. I brushed it off. It was probably just the isolation. The second day started like the first, quiet, easygoing. We had breakfast, made some plans to explore the woods a little, and spent a good part of the afternoon wandering the trails around the cabin. We found an old stream, where we stopped to rest and take in the peaceful sound of water flowing over rocks. The forest was thick, the trees towering above us, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. It was beautiful, but things started to feel different that evening. Jason had always been the most outgoing of the group, full of energy and jokes. He seemed off all day, a little quieter, more distant than usual, but we didn't think much of it at first. We figured he was just tired from the hike, or maybe he had a lot on his mind. It wasn't until later, after dinner, when things started to get strange. We were sitting around the table inside the cabin, talking about the next day's plans. I glanced over at Jason, and I noticed he wasn't looking at us. His eyes were focused on the window, staring out into the dark woods. He didn't say anything, just sat there, still as a statue. The silence stretched on for what felt like too long. It was like something was pulling his attention out there, beyond the cabin, into the blackness of the trees. Leah tried to get his attention, but he didn't respond. Finally, Ben got up and waved a hand in front of his face. That broke the trance, and Jason blinked, looking around the room like he had just woken up. He seemed disoriented, confused. "Hey, you good, man?" Ben asked. Jason nodded, but his face was pale, his eyes wide like he hadn't slept in days. "Yeah, just got lost in thought for a second." He didn't say much more after that, and we let it slide. But something in his voice, it didn't sound right. I shook it off. Maybe it was just fatigue. We finished up the night like we always did, drinking, talking, joking. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too quiet outside. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the occasional rustle in the trees had stopped. It was unsettling, like the whole forest had gone still. We decided to call it a night around midnight. I was the last one to head to bed, and I remember walking down the hall to my room, glancing at the windows as I passed. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. I couldn't help but feel like someone, or something, was out there watching me. I turned quickly and went to my room, locking the door behind me, trying to push the thought out of my head. The next thing I remember is waking up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was a noise, or maybe it was just that feeling again, the one that told me something wasn't right. I looked at the clock, 3:12 a.m., and rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. That's when I noticed Jason's bed was empty. At first, I thought he had just gotten up to use the bathroom or something, but when I looked around the cabin, I didn't see him anywhere. I listened, straining to hear any sound, footsteps, anything, but all I heard was the deep silence of the cabin. I stood up, my heart starting to race as I tiptoed down the hall, checking the other rooms. I knocked on Rachel and Leah's doors, whispering for them to wake up. Ben was already awake by the time I got to his room. We met in the hallway, and we all agreed something was off. Jason had been acting strange, but now he was just gone. We gathered in the living room and tried to piece things together. No one had heard anything. The doors were all locked. Jason had disappeared without a trace. We weren't sure what to think. Maybe he had just gone for a walk, but he wouldn't have left in the middle of the night without telling anyone. We debated whether we should go out into the woods and look for him, but it was pitch black outside, and we had no idea where to even start. We stayed up, talking quietly, trying to figure out what to do, but nothing made sense. Jason had just vanished. Around dawn, we finally decided to split up and search. Ben, Leah, and Rachel went toward the woods while I stayed behind in the cabin, trying to keep my mind busy. I couldn't stop thinking about Jason. What happened to him? Why did he leave without a word? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that we weren't going to find him. Not the way we wanted to, anyway. When the others came back later that morning, they had no sign of him. They had searched every inch of the woods, calling his name, but nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. It was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. We couldn't understand it. There were no tracks, no signs that he had gone anywhere at all. It was like the forest had swallowed him up. We spent the entire day trying to figure out what to do. The police were miles away, and it would take hours for them to get here. We tried to keep calm, but the panic kept creeping in. Jason was just gone. That night, we decided to sleep in shifts, taking turns keeping watch in case Jason came back or we heard something. The cabin felt wrong now, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. Around midnight, I heard something, a noise outside, soft but distinct. It was like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I shot up from my bed, straining my ears. The others were awake too, their eyes wide and tense. I motioned for them to be quiet, listening hard. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. It was Jason. He was standing outside the cabin. I didn't even think. I threw open the door and rushed out into the cold night, calling his name. But when I reached the porch, I stopped dead in my tracks. He was sitting at the table. Jason. He was just sitting there, staring blankly at the wall, like nothing had happened. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, as if he hadn't slept in days. I could feel the air around me grow heavy, like the entire forest was watching us. There was something wrong about him, something off. We stood there in silence for what felt like forever. Ben was the first to speak, his voice shaking. "Jason, what the hell happened? Where did you go?" Jason didn't respond. He just sat there, motionless, staring at us with wide eyes. His smile was the only thing that moved, a strange, wide grin that didn't belong on his face. It was like he wasn't really there at all. Finally, his voice broke the silence. But it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, colder, like something else. "You shouldn't have come." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Those words sent a chill down my spine. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Jason's grin widened even further, if that was possible, as he repeated the words, We're all here now. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, staring at him. His eyes never left mine, never blinked. And in that moment, I knew something terrible had happened. We didn't stay much longer after that. We packed up as quickly as we could and left the cabin, not saying a word to each other. We didn't look back. To this day, I still don't understand what happened. I don't know where Jason went or what happened to him out there in the woods. But whatever it wasn't him anymore. We left the cabin behind, and we never spoke of it again. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, I still hear his voice. And I know that whatever happened that night, it's still out there, waiting. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend at the cabin. I had been looking forward to getting away from everything. No work, no calls, just the peace of nature. I'd booked this cabin months ago, tucked away in the woods just outside of town. It was a small, old place, nothing fancy, but it had everything I needed. A fireplace, a few rooms, and a big front porch where I could sit and watch the trees sway in the wind. I planned on spending my time reading, hiking, maybe fishing if I felt like it. It was just supposed to be a break. The first night was peaceful. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the sounds of the forest surrounded me. I stayed up late, reading by the fire, until the only light left was from the dim embers in the hearth. I slept soundly that night, wrapped in a blanket, the silence outside comforting, as if nothing could touch me out there. But by the second night, something felt off. I woke up to the sound of something faint, footsteps. I blinked, unsure if I had been dreaming. At first, it was so quiet, almost like a trick of the mind. I listened intently. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking around outside. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something bigger. But then the sound moved closer to the cabin. I lay in bed, trying not to breathe too loudly. My heart started racing. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They came closer, louder now. I could hear them against the wooden porch, each step heavy and slow, like someone was circling the cabin. My breath caught in my throat, and I finally got the courage to pull myself out of bed. I crept to the window and peeked outside. The porch was empty. There was nothing out there, just the dark woods and the dim glow of the moon. I exhaled, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe it had been an animal after all. I turned to go back to bed when I heard it again, the footsteps. This time, they were unmistakable. They were right outside the window, as if someone was standing there, just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and went out the back door, the beam cutting through the darkness. I scanned the yard, the trees, the shed by the edge of the property. Nothing, no sign of anyone. I checked around the cabin, making sure all the windows and doors were locked. Everything seemed fine, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound, every crack of a branch or rustling leaf made me jump. I kept expecting to hear footsteps again, but nothing came. Just the quiet, empty night. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. It was an old cabin, creaky and full of noise. Maybe the floorboards had just settled. The next day, I went for a long hike to clear my mind. The woods were beautiful, and the sun was warm on my face. I felt like maybe the night before had just been my imagination. After all, I was alone in the woods. There was bound to be some weird noises. But that night, it started again. I was sitting in front of the fire, reading a book, when I heard the footsteps once more. Soft at first, then louder, just like the night before. They were coming from the porch again, slow and steady. My heart pounded in my chest. I told myself it was just my nerves playing tricks on me, that I was expecting it, so I was hearing things. But then I heard something else, whispers. I froze. The footsteps stopped, but the whispers continued, low and unintelligible. It wasn't just one voice either. There were several, and they seemed to be all around me, like a dozen people standing in the woods just outside the cabin. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew one thing. Those voices weren't mine. They didn't belong to anyone I knew. They were strangers. My breath caught in my throat. I turned the volume of my thoughts up, trying to block out the whispers, trying to tell myself it was just the wind again. But the more I listened, the clearer the whispers became, though the words were still a blur. I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I stood up from my chair and backed away from the window, my eyes darting around the room, searching for any sign of someone or something. The footsteps started again, louder now, coming from the front of the cabin, then moving to the side. Whoever or whatever was out there was walking around like they were looking for a way in. My heart raced. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were voices, low but distinct. One of them almost sounded like a laugh, and I swear I could feel my spine shiver. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the door. I swung it open, shining the beam into the night. The air was cold, biting even, and the silence was overwhelming. I stepped outside, heart pounding in my chest, and shined the light around. Nothing. The yard was empty, the shadows of the trees stretching long under the moon. I looked behind me at the cabin. No one was in sight. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint, eerie quiet of the woods. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was all in my head. But that voice inside me, the one that tells you when something isn't right, was screaming that I wasn't alone. The next few hours were a blur. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, listening for any movement, any sign that someone was out there, hiding in the darkness. I sat by the fire, trying to steady my breath, but my thoughts kept racing. The whispers wouldn't stop. Even though I was alone in the cabin, I could still hear them, soft and faint, like they were coming from the walls themselves. I had to get out of there. I knew it. I didn't care about the cabin or the weekend I had planned. I just wanted to be gone. I gathered my things as quickly as I could, stuffing my clothes and essentials into my bag, trying to keep my hands steady. I was almost out the door when I heard it again. A loud bang, like something heavy had dropped onto the floor above me. I ran. I bolted for the door, threw it open, and sprinted into the woods. My legs were shaking, but I didn't stop. I didn't care how far I ran. I didn't care if I tripped or if I got lost. I just needed to be away from that cabin. The whispers followed me, echoing in my ears, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from. The darkness pressed in on all sides. The trees seemed to bend towards me, and I couldn't see anything but my flashlight's weak beam. But I didn't look back. Couldn't. I ran for what felt like hours. My lungs burned, my body ached, but I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just ran until I finally reached the town. I stumbled into the first gas station I found, panting and sweating. I told the clerk there that something was wrong with the cabin, but he just nodded and said he'd heard similar stories before. I never went back. The memories of that night still haunt me. The footsteps, the whispers, the feeling that I wasn't alone, even when I should have been. Maybe I was just imagining it, but I don't think so. There's something about that cabin, something in those woods, that I'll never understand. Maybe it's just the isolation. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Whatever it was, I'm never going back to find out. I'm done with that cabin, and I don't care to know who or what was out there with me. I don't think I'll ever be able to shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting. I woke with a start, my eyes snapping open in the dark, heart racing. It was still early, far too early for anything to be happening. But there it was again, the faintest creak of the cabin's floorboards. The sound was almost imperceptible, but I knew it wasn't the house settling. No, it was something else, something more deliberate, something that didn't belong. I held my breath, straining to listen, trying to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe some animal outside trying to get in. The door was solid, thick wood, and I knew nothing would make it budge unless something real, something heavy, was pressing against it. I tried to dismiss the thought, but then came the shuffle, the unmistakable sound of something moving just outside my door. Slow, intentional, like someone was taking their time, making sure I would hear them. My breath caught in my throat, my heart thudding louder in my chest. I lay perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest sound would give me away, as if whatever was out there hadn't already figured out that I was awake. But then, I heard something else, something softer, something so close I almost didn't believe it. A soft, rattling sound. It was the door handle gently, almost nervously, turning. It didn't make sense. No one else was supposed to be here. I was supposed to be alone in this cabin. The whole point of getting away, of being out here, was to escape everything else, to be left in peace. I stared at the door, watching the faint shadows of the moon spill through the cracks, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. But then it came again. A slow shuffle, the creak of the boards outside, and then silence. My heart raced even harder, my skin prickling with cold sweat. I sat up, my muscles stiff from the tension, but I didn't move. I couldn't bring myself to check the window or the door or anything else. I reached for my phone, hoping I could at least call for help. But when my fingers brushed the screen, I saw that the signal was gone. The dreaded no service icon mocked me. The only sound now was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I listened, every muscle tensed, barely breathing. And then I heard it, so faint I almost thought I imagined it at first. A whisper. It wasn't loud, wasn't clear, but it was there, just barely crossing the threshold. I see you. The words scraped across my spine, sending a cold shiver through me. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The voice was too calm, too sure of itself. It didn't sound panicked or rushed, like someone who was just trying to scare me. No, it sounded like someone who knew they had all the time in the world, someone who didn't need to rush because they were already in control. I tried to push myself further into the corner, my legs tangled in the blankets, the only thing separating me from the door. My fingers fumbled for my phone again, but the screen remained lifeless, mocking me with its silence. I knew it was hopeless, but I had to try. I couldn't do anything else. And then came the worst part, the waiting. Every small sound, every little shift in the room made my skin crawl. I told myself to stay calm, told myself it was nothing. Maybe a critter, maybe the house settling, maybe even my own mind playing tricks. But that didn't explain the whisper. That didn't explain the door handle rattling or the soft shuffle of footsteps outside. I backed away even further into the corner, my eyes fixed on the door, my pulse quickening with every minute that passed. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I closed my eyes, just for a second, trying to calm myself. But then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate creak, the weight of someone or something leaning against the door. I opened my eyes in a panic, my hand pressing hard against my mouth to stifle the scream that wanted to break free. My mind was racing, searching for some explanation, any explanation that would make sense of what was happening. But then the most horrifying thing happened. I saw it. A shadow slipped under the door, a dark, shifting shape that stretched across the wooden floor in front of me. I couldn't make out any details, but I didn't need to. I knew what I had seen. Someone was right outside. They were there, just inches away from me, and there was nothing I could do. No way to fight back, no way to escape. I felt a wave of dizziness crash over me, my vision swimming as I leaned back against the wall, my chest tight, breath coming in short gasps. I pressed my hands to my eyes, trying to focus, trying to fight the panic that was clawing at me. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to do something. But what? The shadow under the door was gone. The room was still, silent. I told myself to stay calm, to think logically. But logic didn't seem to matter. Nothing made sense. Nothing was normal anymore. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the door handle rattled again. Slowly this time, like someone was testing it, trying to see if I was still there. Couldn't take it. I couldn't sit there in the dark, waiting for whatever it was to make the next move. I glanced around the room, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. A lamp, a chair, anything. But there was nothing. The cabin was sparse, simple, just like the listing had promised. There wasn't even a flashlight. I felt like I was suffocating, my heart threatening to beat out of my chest. And then, before I even realized it, the door creaked open. My mind couldn't comprehend it. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. But there it was, slowly opening, the old wood groaning on its hinges. I couldn't stop myself. I bolted out of the corner, but my legs were like lead. I stumbled, tripping over the blankets, barely managing to stay on my feet as I rushed to the door. My hands shook so violently I could barely grasp the handle. I wrenched it open, expecting no, praying for something, anything, out there. But there was nothing. The porch was empty. The night was as still as ever. I stepped outside, my breath fogging the air in front of me. The moonlight cast long shadows across the porch, stretching toward the trees, toward the woods. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from one corner to the next. Nothing. No figures lurking in the shadows. No sounds of footsteps or whispers in the dark. For a moment, I let out a shaky breath. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I had been imagining things. But then my gaze shifted to the ground. There, on the porch, just by the edge, was a footprint. Fresh, dark, a boot print, left in the dirt, the edge of the heel still sharp. I backed away, my chest tight. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who had been here, or how long they had been watching me. But I didn't stay. Couldn't. I ran down the steps, not looking back, not stopping until I reached the car, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know who or what had been in that cabin with me, but I didn't wait around to find out. I left and I never went back, and I don't think I ever will.